Hey there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we're going to be learning some English listening tips today so that you can understand native speakers and improve your comprehension and improve your speaking abilities in conversation. So we're going to be doing this where I'm going to explain a process that I've been developing and working on, and then I will also record a different video where I show you exactly how it works, how I use it as a student, so you can see it in practice. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, make sure you follow me on Twitch, and then you won't miss any of the updates. So let's get into it. This is the first of a series that I'm planning on creating of English listening tips. I think listening in English is really challenging, and I want to give you some ideas of how you can study, why you have difficulty understanding, and just some different things that you can try and hopefully improve what you understand, improve your comprehension, and eventually that will also help you become a more confident speaker. So the one for today is called Focus, Check, Repeat. And this is what I would say is one of my simpler and maybe more relaxed techniques. So it's not something that you have to sit down and do 2 or 3 hours of really intense study. You can just add this idea to normal videos that you're watching or normal audio content that you are watching to help understand a little bit more and actually checking yourself that you do understand, because it's important to remember that when we think we understand, we always understand a little bit less. So it's always good to double check. So before we get started then, I want to just take a second and ask you a question. What's the hardest part of listening in English? Okay, so I actually want you to sit down for a second, take a minute, maybe get a pen and paper or use your phone and just write down a couple of things like why listening in English is hard. So I speak to students all the time, and everyone says the different things, but really listening generally is one of the things that people struggle with, as well as being able to speak confidently. And with conversation being speaking and listening, those two things become really, really important. So I guess to give you some ideas of the things that I often hear, it's normally stuff like people speak very quickly, or maybe they have a different accent that I can't understand, or I know the words when I'm reading, but when I'm listening I just can't identify them. And so there's lots of different things, but it is really difficult because English is not a phonetic language. It's not a language where you can read it and you know the pronunciation. It's not a language where when you speak the words always sound the same. Depending on the surrounding words, depending on how we're using it in a conversation and our accent, it does actually change the sound. So it makes it very difficult to recognize and identify them clearly. So if you find listening to normal content in English very difficult, it's because English is very difficult. So it's not you in this case. But let's have a look at the plan for today. So this technique I want to show you. First of all, I want to explain why we have difficulty learning English or listening in English, and then to show you the technique that's going to really help us to understand native speakers, understand native content. So you can just turn on Netflix, you can turn on YouTube, and that you'll be able to understand what people say much more easily and actually understand a lot of the detail, so not just the general idea. To do this, we're going to improve your listening comprehension, because it's really important that you are able to identify and recognize words more easily. And especially when we think of this in conversation, the more easily you understand what you're listening to, the more energy, the more brain power you have left to be able to actually speak. So your speaking automatically improves as well. So it's super useful. And we're also going to learn a lot of vocabulary along the way, because as part of this technique, you're going to be doing lots and lots of repetition, and repetition is the best way to learn new vocabulary and to remember it more easily. So with these things together, hopefully you're going to find this really interesting and really useful. So stick around. Here we go then. So the problem, why is listening difficult? Generally, when we're listening and we don't understand what we're hearing, there's normally one of two problems. So the first one is vocabulary. They're using new words that you've just never heard before, and that, makes perfect sense. You don't know the words, and so you can't understand what they're saying. So, and there's the solution to that is learning more vocabulary. The other problem is that the sound that you're hearing doesn't match the sound that you know, and so you kind of miss it when we're in conversation. So, this is the most common problem that I notice. And it's the thing that people will often tell me that, for example, they turn on the subtitles and they understand everything perfectly, but without the subtitles, they just can't get the detail. Really, the technique we're going to be learning is focusing on these two key areas. So it's when there's new vocabulary, being able to learn those so that we understand them in the future, but really focusing on the sounds. So that what sounds we're using, how we are using them, when we are using them, which means that your brain can then recognize those patterns of sounds and understand those words when you hear them again next time. So it's all about pattern recognition and focusing on sounds. So remember, it's not about words, because written words in English don't represent the sounds a lot of the time. So, moving on. The method then. So you can see down this side, we have the steps. And so first of all, you need to be finding quality content. Then, when you have that content, you need to be focusing on it. You really need to pay attention to see whether you understand and to try to understand properly. You can't just press play and go and do the dishes or go and do something else. You have to really focus to get this to work. Once you've done that sort of focus listening, then we want to check to make sure that what you think you understood is what you actually understood. It's correct and it matches what they said. So that stage is very important. And then we repeat it to reinforce in our brain the correct way of doing things. So when you notice that you made a mistake when you're listening, you actually want to be able to teach your brain that the correct way is something different. So that's why we do this repetition. And then the final step is improving. The more you do it, the more you will improve and the more easily you'll recognize these patterns. So let's go through the details then. So when I say quality content, to learn a language, you basically have to copy the things that you see and the things that you hear. So if you're listening to native speaker content, things that we watch on TV or films or YouTube channels, if you're watching that real stuff, you're going to be hearing all of the language that you want to copy, which is really the idea. So usually I'd recommend YouTube for this. It's fantastic. Also Netflix. And really, whatever you find, you want it to be sort of natural conversational or real native speakers. And you also want it to have good quality subtitles, okay? So no auto-generated subtitles on YouTube. Those aren't really going to work here because you need to be able to check what you're listening to against the subtitles to check accurately that you are understanding correctly. So when you do this on YouTube, what you can do is you can search for anything you like, and then you can filter by subtitles and closed captions, so CC. And when you do that, it will then filter the list, and the majority of those will have real subtitles. So you can look at it and it will say English, and it won't say in brackets auto-generated. So there'll be different ways that they are written, but that's what you're looking for. And this is something that you can do for any type of video. So I do this all the time when I'm studying Italian. I'll search for the name of an ingredient if I want to find cooking videos, or I'll search for the name of a video game that I'm playing, and I'll literally put like Italiano on the end. And so doing that, I can find lots of different videos. It doesn't have to just be, BBC News, for example. You can watch anything that you like, but you really want to find something that does have subtitles because it makes this process much easier and much more effective. When we talk about focusing, then it's really important here that when you are listening to it, that you are really trying to pay attention and testing yourself. So the idea is that you want to play one phrase or one sentence, pause the video, and then you want to ask yourself, what did they say? And this isn't just about, did I understand the general idea? I want to actually try and be able to replicate the phrase. I want to know what they said, the words they chose, how they said it. Because doing that is really important because you need to be able to hear the details and how they phrased it and what they're doing. Okay? So to do this, I use an extension called Language Reactor, which I'll link in the video when I save it later. And that is also very helpful. But even if you just press play and pause with no subtitles, it's really important you don't use subtitles yet. You just want to listen, take a second and say, what did they say? I prefer actually to say it out loud because that's then also speaking practice. But even if you write it down or you think about it, that's also perfectly fine. I try also to make sure I do this only listening once, because if you think about a conversation, you only get one opportunity really to hear what someone's saying. They will say it, and then you can ask them to repeat it, but generally you have to try and get all of the information the first time. So doing it with a video, it kind of replicates that process, and it means if you're practicing close to what you actually do, then it means that the reality will always be better. And then if I didn't understand, or maybe I think I missed something, I might repeat it 2 or 3 times just to sort of really try and give myself the best opportunity to do it. And so when I do this, I tend to use headphones. I find it much easier listening with headphones because it's not really a challenge of being able to listen to it with lots of background noise and stuff like that. What you want to do is you're just testing, can I understand this? So with headphones, I find the audio is generally clearer. I can turn the volume up so it's quite loud, and it just gets rid of that distractions. If you've got a busy house like I do, then you don't have to worry about that background noise and you can really just concentrate. Once you've done that, then once you've decided, I know what this phrase is, then you need to check it. So this is where the subtitles come in. You want to turn on the subtitles, look at the phrase that you just listened to, and say, is it the same? So is it the same in terms of the general meaning? That's the first point. You want to check that you've got a general idea. And then thinking, is it how they said it? Is it the same tense? Do they use the same vocabulary I heard? Are there articles or prepositions that I didn't notice? So you're really trying to see how far away what you said you heard and what you actually heard are, because you really want to try and get those as close, if not exactly the same. So, and this is where you need to really think about it and be honest and say, did I understand this correctly? If you didn't, that's okay, because that's how we learn. Then, now we know what I made a mistake, if I heard something incorrectly, now I need to repeat the audio, reading the subtitles, and really checking that I can hear all of those individual phrases. So this can be really difficult when they're speaking quickly, because obviously it's difficult to identify the words. But because you've listened a couple of times, you've read the subtitles, you know what they should be saying. You know what the words are. So you just need to repeat them a couple of times just to kind of identify them and tell your brain, these sounds mean these things. So I would do this maybe 2 or 3 times. If you want to also repeat it, saying it out loud and listening again, but it's really about listening and focusing on what they actually said to really make that connection in your brain. And this is why the accurate subtitles are really important, because if they aren't accurate, you won't be able to identify if you made a mistake. So that's why this part is really, really important. And then you just move on to the next phrase, and you literally go phrase by phrase all the way through the video, whatever you're watching, and that is really the whole idea. So it's not something that takes hours and hours. You don't have to sit down and do it like crazy, but it's something where you just take a little extra time and you do it. So also, something that I want to mention is that usually when I do any sort of listening activity or any study, I'll always watch the video or the section of the video I'm looking at once with no subtitles and no pauses. I won't understand everything, but the idea is that you want to just get a general idea of the gist of what's happening. So in this case, what I would do is choose a short video, listen to it once, and then I would go through sentence by sentence, because it just gives you a better idea of the overall subject, but you still need to find the detail. So that's really important. So this quote or this definition of improvement, I think, is really important. So it's an occasion when something gets better or when you make it better. And this is really what this technique is all about. It's about you doing something where you make your language better and you're actively trying to improve something specific. And even if you only spend 5 minutes doing this, you will understand phrases better than before you started. So all of these little improvements are what's going to really take you up to that next level. And if you're at an intermediate level, which is most of my students, most people are in that area, it's really important to focus on the small victories, the small improvements, because when you add them all up, that's really how you then reach the advanced level. And it can feel like you're not making progress. But every new word you recognize when you're listening, all the new vocabulary you're learning, they slowly build up over time and they really develop. So it's really important to remember that it's not about being able in 2 weeks to suddenly be able to understand everything on Netflix and turn off the subtitles. But over time, if you do this regularly, if you practice, you will be able to understand native speakers who speak naturally. You will be able to watch TV series and films. And from my experience, I have used this technique myself when I have been learning Italian, and now I can watch TV series generally without subtitles, with minimal difficulty, let's say. So I have some tips for you. Okay, so these tips are just to make it slightly more effective from my experience as a learner, because as well as an English teacher, I am a language learner and I really like to, try and practice it myself because I understand how difficult it is. So the first one is keep it short, and in this case, short in length of time, not in trousers. So the idea here is about keeping the video really short, because for me, I find you can do this for a film, and I often hear people saying, take a film and I spend months studying this film. That's great. For me, I find that really demotivating because I never finish anything. Whereas if I pick a 4 5 minute video, I usually recommend less than 5 minutes. You can complete a 5 minute video, even if you're doing this technique with every single sentence. You can probably complete it in maybe half an hour, something like that. So it's not unrealistic. So if you're super busy, you don't have to think, I'm going to allocate 3 hours a day every day. That's impossible. You can break it down, but in the space of an hour, maybe you can actually finish a complete video. And I think that's really important, because if you finish it, it's that sense of achievement of, that's one video down. If you try and do a 45-minute episode on Netflix, yes, you'll learn a lot, but it's going to take you forever to finish it. It's going to take hours and hours and hours, days and days. And really, personally, I find that really demotivating, because after a while, I just get bored and I want to do something new. So if I do a 5 minute video, then I can choose a completely different video, a different subject, maybe a different speaker. So and if you are watching a TV series and there's maybe a particular conversation you find really difficult, take that section, just cut a couple of minutes and use that. Don't try and do a whole film or a whole TV series, because it's just going to take forever. And I think it's better actually to have more variety, choose different subjects, come across new vocabulary, and that's actually going to be much more beneficial. So I find it helps to keep me motivated and keep me really enjoying the process. Then, when it comes to choosing a video, I usually try to focus on one of two areas. Either I focus on the accent, so I choose a speaker that speaks very quickly, maybe the accent is difficult, something that I find it very difficult to understand. Or I choose something that is a subject I don't know, which has very difficult vocabulary, so lots of words that I'm not aware of. And I do this, and I do this in isolation. I don't normally do them both together because it makes it very, very difficult. It normally takes much longer, and then sometimes it's just a bit overwhelming. So usually, if I'm finding somebody who maybe speaks very quickly, like a vlogger, for example, then I would choose it on a subject I'm very comfortable with, so then the vocabulary generally is not so much of a problem. So if it's about, for example, learning languages for me, or video games or cooking, those are subjects I really like, so my vocabulary normally is better in those areas. Or I would choose maybe a presentation about something scientific that's very interesting, but I don't know the vocabulary. But when I do that, I would choose maybe a TED Ed video or something where the speaker is presenting and they speak very, very clearly. So it's still natural, but it's less sort of trying to understand a native speaker who's speaking very, very quick. So you can do both, but I would usually choose one or the other. And if you aren't sure which one to choose, I would ask yourself, what is a bigger problem? Is it more that when you're listening, you don't understand a lot of words, but the rest of it is pretty clear? Or is it that when they speak, that they speak very quickly, or the accent is difficult? And whichever of those you find more of a problem, that's the type of video you need to be focusing on. And especially when it comes to people speaking quickly, you need to practice listening to people who speak very, very quickly. And sometimes I will also try speeding up the video just a little bit as well, because if you get comfortable with someone who speaks as quickly as you've ever heard, like the fastest speaker in the world, then when you speak to a normal person, it suddenly feels much more slow, much more relaxed. Your brain has much more. So that's why if you're focusing on speed, I often recommend news reports or weather reports because they have a very short amount of time and lots of information to give you. So if you can follow that very, very quick speech, that dense information, then a normal conversation suddenly feels much easier. So often testing yourself with something much more challenging, like an extremely difficult accent, means that when you're speaking to someone who doesn't have such an extreme accent, it generally tends to be a little bit easier. So it's sort of pushing yourself so everything else feels a little bit more relaxed is the idea. Then this one I think is really important, and it's something I have struggled with a lot as a student, and it's something I often notice with my students as well. And it's all about being honest. So there are some cases where we just don't understand. And I often hear, for example, I will talk to my students and I will show them a video and I'll ask them some questions and they're like, yeah, 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 I understand. And so I say, okay. And then I ask them specific questions about it where they have to actually have understood the video clearly to really answer those questions. And they can't answer the questions. And I think it's always a good idea to be honest when you don't understand it, honest with yourself, because if you don't understand, that's something that you have identified which you can learn from. So that's really the whole point. Is here we're trying to find things you don't understand so that you can learn from them, improve. If you tell yourself you understand everything, you're not going to improve because you think you understand. So it's being really sort of self-critical, being really honest and saying, do I understand what they're saying? And if you don't, that's actually okay in this case. And it's not about being nervous or worrying about it because you're not having a conversation with someone. It doesn't matter if you don't understand. The whole point of this is helping you to understand better. So really being honest and almost being very critical of yourself is really important. So I often take this to the extreme. And when I'm doing this, I will say that I didn't understand it correctly if I cannot reproduce the entire phrase. And obviously, that's a very intense way to look at it. But for me, I'm trying to copy the way they say things, the order of the words, the prepositions, the nouns, the adjectives, everything they're doing, I want to speak like that. So I really try to push myself to say it or to understand it exactly as they said it, because that means when I'm speaking, I can copy it better. So it's very, very effective. If you just go, yeah, yeah, I know the idea, and you move on, that's where you won't improve your listening because you're not actually focusing on how do they produce those words? How do they produce those sounds? So just be honest and remember it's all about learning. So making mistakes and not understanding is actually what you need. It's not a bad thing in this context, okay? So always do that. And then be patient. Okay, so you'll see on the pictures here, I've got a little acorn and an oak tree, and it's from small acorns grow mighty oaks. It's something that and as I've written here, Rome wasn't built in a day. Nothing happens overnight. You're not going to do this technique for an hour and suddenly understand everything you hear. But the slow accumulation of knowledge, of understanding, is what's going to help you reach that next level. And especially when you're trying to move to the intermediate, to the advanced levels, it's not something you can do quickly. It doesn't matter how much you study. Even if you studied 5 hours a day, every day, it's still going to take you a long time to learn the skills you need to do. And listening is only one of those skills. So, but if you think about this, if you practice this a little bit every week or every day, even if you did 5 minutes a day, that's going to build up very, very quickly. And you're going to notice massive progress if you look back in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And, like I put here, if you study 5 minutes a day, that's 30 hours a year. Okay, and that's a lot because if you do 5 minutes a day of listening and maybe 5 minutes a day of reading, that's now 60 hours of learning that you've done every year. And that's not including the conversations, that's not including just watching Netflix or YouTube. And so it's really important to be patient and understand it's going to take time, but all of those little steps you're doing are going to produce results. So it's, being a little more relaxed. If you don't suddenly understand everything straight away, it's understanding that the more you practice, you will understand it at some point. And the fact that you're working hard and studying and really want to, and watching this kind of video to get ideas of how to improve, means you will improve. So it's really important to just be patient, be relaxed, and not stress about it too much. And this is my kind of mantra for life. It's something my granddad always told me, and it's stuck with me forever, which is I can, I will, I must. Whenever I was feeling negative, whenever I was saying that I couldn't do something, whenever I said that something was just too difficult, he would always tell me this: I can, I will, I must. And this is, I think, a perfect idea for learning English. It's you can improve because what you need, because if you are understanding this, you have gone from not knowing any English at some point in your life to understanding what I'm saying now. So you can do it. It is possible. Everyone can do it. There's no such thing as an amazing language learner and it's a miracle. Everyone can do this. It's everyone has different strengths and different weaknesses, but you can learn English and you can improve. And if you study, you will improve. It's sometimes I notice we get very frustrated with the progress. We want to learn faster or better. But if you continue, you will improve. And just as an example, I've been studying Italian now for over a decade, and I still have so much to learn, and I'm still learning and improving every day. And it's never going to stop. But I know I will reach the level I want to reach in the future because I've reached the level I have now. And I must. You want to learn English, so you must study. You must practice, and then you will improve. And so it's all about being positive. Every time you sit there and say, I can't do this, what you mean is, I can't do it yet, but I will in the future. Okay, so always remember that when you listen to something or you read something and you understand nothing and it feels like nothing's working and you're not making progress, you will. But you're looking at this right now and you're not looking back on all of the progress you've made and you're not looking at all of the progress you're going to make. So remember, I can, I will, I must. And that's it. So I hope you found this really interesting, and I am going to be sharing a practical example of how I do this as a student. So I'm going to show you how I actually go through the progress. So make sure you check out that video. And as you can see here, check out my other things. I'm going to be posting these video lessons on YouTube. I'm recording them on Twitch. I'm also going to be posting stuff on Instagram. So make sure you follow me everywhere, and then you won't miss out on any updates. And I would love to see what you think, or if there's any questions, or if there's any techniques or processes that you would like me to discuss. Put a comment in the video below. And also there's going to be a link in the description so that you can download this presentation, so you can keep it for reference and you can go through it to remind yourself of exactly how everything works. So if you're on YouTube, have a fantastic day, have a great day learning languages, and if you're on Twitch, let's keep going.